as we have our final session here. Thank you again, Dr. Ross. Please give a hand to our speaker, Dr. Ross.
Well, thank you. See if I got my microphone on. Sting 3.14159. I think it's on. Thank you. All right. Well, as I mentioned last night, Reasons to Believe is something my wife and I founded 37 years ago. It's an apologetics ministry, but it's predominantly for the purpose of evangelism. We only do that apologetics, which has proven value in bringing people to faith in Christ, especially people who have no background in the Christian faith. That's our mission. And again, we have a book table over there. And if you scan this QR code, we will give you a free copy of our book, Testable Faith. Now, the two chapters in the Bible that really give you the theology of evangelism is 1 Peter 3 and 1 Peter 4. But I'm just going to focus on one verse, and it's 1 Peter 3:15. It's the best known of those two chapters, but again, I commend you. Read both, the entirety of both chapters. But 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And before I launched Reasons to Believe, I was an evangelism pastor at a church between Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the headquarters of the Skeptic Society. We have a very interesting group of people that come into our church. But the whole focus here is being prepared to give good reasons that you may need, but especially the people you're engaging need. So be prepared. And that's kind of our mission at Reasons to Believe, is to give you the tools so that you will be prepared to answer the questions that you get from your non-Christian friends and associates, but to do it with gentleness and respect, because non-believers will listen more intently to your demeanor than they do your apologetics arguments. The two need to go together. Now, what I've learned over the 40 plus years of my ministry is that if you will prepare good, sound reasons for your faith and hope in Jesus Christ and are able to deliver them with gentleness and respect, you will see God supernaturally bringing people to you that in advance he is prepared to hear and respond to your good reasons. A book of Acts is filled with these kinds of stories, but the book of Acts is not over. It's still going on today. And many of us have had the experience of seeing God performing these miracles where he brings people to you. Now, I travel a lot on airplanes, and I get to have conversations with people on airplanes. I mean, if it's a several-hour flight, what are people going to do? But what I've noticed in all of my experiences in airplanes, over half the conversations I have with people in airplanes are those with doctoral degrees in science or doctoral degrees in theology. And you and I both know that doesn't make up 50% of the flying U.S. public. And I have a friend who was part of the Mormon faith and became a Christian. Like me, he flies a lot. But who does he get to sit beside? He gets to sit beside Mormons and people who have left the Mormon faith, and so God gives them opportunities. God knows who I am. He knows who the people are. He works miracles to bring us together. And I'm going to share one story that I'm going to wrap around my message about why the universe is the way it is. And I got on this airplane, and it was one of these situations where they needed to seat a family, so they changed my seat, and they gave me a first-class seat. So I'm sitting in first class, and then this gentleman sits down beside me, introduces himself, and he says, "I'm from Germany, I'm a quantum physicist, and I'm an atheist." And apparently, that's fairly typical of German scholastics, that's how they introduce themselves to people. So he says, "Who are you?" And I says, "Well, I'm not a quantum physicist, I'm an astrophysicist, and I'm not from Germany, I'm from Canada. I'm not an atheist, I'm a Christian." And he says, "This is going to be an interesting flight." So he said, "Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" And it's a several-hour flight, and we're in first class, it's quiet. And so he begins his questions and he says, number one, if there's a God out there, I can see why he would want to have a star like the sun, a planet like the earth, maybe the moon. But why 2 trillion useless galaxies? Why? Why does the universe have to be so incredibly big and so incredibly massive? Why is the universe so very massive? And I says, well, the universe's mass actually determines the makeup of its elements. And so the universe begins with only one element in the periodic table, hydrogen. But the universe starts off infinitesimally small and nearly infinitely hot. But as it expands from the cosmic creation event, the temperature of the universe cools down. It gets cooler and cooler. And the temperature region where nuclear fusion occurs is between 150 billion and 150 million and 17 million degrees centigrade. That's where hydrogen gets fused into helium. And if you make the universe less massive than what it is, it will expand so rapidly from the cosmic creation event, it only spends a few seconds or less in that temperature region, in which case not much of the primordial hydrogen gets fused into helium. And now you've got stars that just have a huge amount of hydrogen, a tiny amount of helium, and in that case, they're unable in their nuclear furnaces to fuse anything heavier than lithium, which means you have a universe that forever has no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, no phosphorus, and no possibility for life. And you say, well, what happens if you make the universe slightly more massive? And I say, well, if you make the universe slightly more massive than it is, by the way, this is what you would have if the universe is a little bit less massive than it is. You would have a periodic table with hydrogen and helium. It sure would make passing a chemistry class easy. But there'd be no chemistry class because there'd be no possibility for life. And if you make the universe slightly more massive, what happens is the universe now, instead of spending just a few seconds in the temperature window where fusion can occur, will spend more than 20 seconds. And if it's more than 20 seconds, so much of that primordial hydrogen is fused into helium that when future stars form, they very quickly convert all of the matter of the universe into elements heavier than manganese, iron and heavier. And in that universe, you also have no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no phosphorus. And to get the life, you need to have the universe spending about 20 seconds in that temperature window. Well, the question this quantum physicist asks is, well, okay, I can see that it has to be fine-tuned. What is the degree of fine-tuning? I said, well, if you were to change the total mass of the universe by 1 part in a quadrillion, there'd be no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no possibility for life. And he just was kind of blown away. The cosmic mass density, or even the tiniest fraction, greater or smaller, no life would be possible anytime, anywhere in the universe. And he said, well, I know the universe is old. How old do you astronomers think the universe is? He said, well, we're trying to measure it with greater and greater precision. The best we've been able to do so far is 13.79 billion years, plus or minus 0.04 billion. He said, well, that's fairly accurate, but tell me, why does it have to be that old? And so here's the problem. If we were created any later or earlier, we would not be able to witness the cosmic creation event. In other words, if God put us here on planet Earth in less time than 13.79 billion years after the cosmic creation event, light from the cosmic creation event would not have adequate time to travel on the space surface of the universe and reach our telescope, which means we wouldn't be able to look back, look far away, and directly witness the universe being created. And he says, well, what happens if it's any later? And I says, well, already dark energy is expanding the farthest reaches of the universe at barely under the velocity of light. And dark energy is accelerating the expansion of the universe. Next year is going to expand more rapidly than it has this year, which means it won't be long before the farthest reaches of the universe are expanding away from us at greater than the velocity of light, which means that we would be unable to witness the cosmic creation event. So we humans are here in the history of the universe at the one time where we could read the whole history book of the universe, from the present all the way back to the very beginning. And it's our ability to use our telescopes to directly observe, directly witness the universe being created, where we get our most rigorous and compelling scientific evidences that there must be a God beyond space and time that created the universe. So what I was suggesting to my quantum physicist friend, do you think somebody wanted us to read the whole book and not just part of the book? And I actually got to explain to him, it's not just that we're the only time. He says, well, maybe this is just a sheer coincidence. And I said, well, here's the other thing. We are living in the only location in this vast universe of 2 trillion galaxies, where every galaxy has got about 100 billion stars. And the vastness of this universe, we're sitting on the only planet where intelligent life is possible, and at the same time, we can look out and see 100% of the history of the universe. It's not just that we're the only time in the history of the universe, we're also in the only location. Do you think somebody wanted us to be able to read the whole book? Okay, only at 14 billion years after the cosmic creation event can humans observe all of cosmic history and directly witness the cosmic creation event. But I'll give you another reason why we're here at 13.79 billion years after the cosmic creation event. In order to have advanced life on planet Earth, we need strong, enduring plate tectonic activity. We also need a strong, enduring magnetic field. And one of the energy sources, one of the more important energy sources that ensures that we have that enduring, strong magnetic field and enduring, strong plate tectonic activity is thorium and uranium. These are radioisotopes. And our planet Earth is the thorium champion of the universe. It has 630 times as much thorium as we would expect in any other rocky body in the universe. We're also the uranium champion of the universe, 340 times as much uranium as what we'd expect in other rocky bodies in the universe. And there's several reasons why we have such a rich store of uranium and thorium. Where do uranium and thorium come from? They're exclusively produced by supernova eruption events and by neutron stars merging together to make black holes. And when the universe is relatively young, it's aggressively producing more and more stars. Then the stars begin to burn out and the star formation begins to subside. What this implies is there will be a time in the history of the universe where the uranium and thorium abundance is at a peak. When is that peak? That peak is when the universe is about a little more than 9 billion years old. That's when thorium and uranium hit a peak abundance. Well, when did Earth form? Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Take 13.8, subtract 4.5 from it, what do you get? A little more than 9 billion years. Planet Earth formed at the moment in the history of the universe when the concentration of uranium and thorium was at a maximum. However, you don't want to have humans at that point. Why? Because when the Earth forms, the sun is also very young. The Earth and the sun form at virtually the same time. And as I mentioned Thursday night to the audience I addressed, stars are a lot like human beings. They're unstable when they're young, they're unstable when they're old. They're maximally stable when they're middle-aged. And in the case of stars, the window when they're stable is not like us human beings. We're stable for most of our lifespan. For stars, it's a lot briefer than that. So for example, we're orbiting the most stable star that we can see anywhere in the universe, but it's quite unstable when it's young, and it will become much more unstable when it's old. And so this shows the flaring activity of our star, the sun. It also shows the level of ultraviolet and X-ray and gamma ray radiation. It's the same curve. And what you see on the y-axis is logarithmic. So for example, in the first 500 million years of the sun's existence, its flaring activity was about 100,000 times greater than it is today, which explains why you don't have microbes until that 500 million years is over. They can't survive the solar radiation. But the moment that the sun becomes stable enough to permit microbes, we immediately have microbes. There's no delay. They show up right away. The origin of life is an instantaneous event. But the solar flaring activity does not reach a minimum until the sun is 4.5 billion years old. So this is why you want to have humans here on planet Earth 4.5 billion years after you get that uranium thorium maximum. And you add the two together and you get 13.8 billion years. Incidentally, it also coincides with several other things that we need for advanced civilization. So for example, what geologists have discovered, there's a moment in the history of the Earth where mineable coal, oil, and natural gas hits a maximum. We're living at that maximum point. If we were here any earlier, we would have less coal, oil, and natural gas to pull out of the ground. If we were here any later, the bacteria would be degrading that coal, oil, and natural gas. We're here on planet Earth at that maximum moment. If you get my book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, I show you another dozen things that line up right at 13.8 billion years. Well, my quantum physicist friend on the airplane said, okay, that's good, but tell me, the universe is filled with dark stuff. There's dark matter, there's dark energy. And I said, yeah, you're right. The universe is predominantly dark stuff. And he said, well, there's a God behind all this stuff. Wouldn't he want everything to be seen? And why is the universe so incredibly dark? And I said, well, you're right. The universe is predominantly made up of dark stuff. And so, for example, we got dark energy, which makes up about 70% of all the stuff of the universe. You've got exotic dark matter. That's matter made up of particles that don't engage strongly with light. That makes up about 23 to 24% of all the stuff of the universe. Then you've got ordinary dark matter. Matter made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons, but they don't emit light. And that's about 4.4% of the total stuff of the universe. When you look through a telescope and you see all those galaxies and stars and nebulae, you're only looking at 0.27% of all the stuff of the universe. But I was able to share with my quantum physicist friend in the airplane that quantity of dark stuff must be exceptionally fine-tuned. Not just the quantity of dark energy, but the quantity of dark matter, the quantity of ordinary matter. All the different kinds of dark stuff need to be exquisitely fine-tuned. As I mentioned last night, just the dark energy must be fine-tuned to better than 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. The dark matter to better than 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. Same thing true of the quantity of ordinary dark matter. It all must be exquisitely fine-tuned. And I said, this doesn't just argue for a deistic God, it argues for a theistic God. Again, if you were here last night, I shared the fact that the very best human engineering achievement we've ever pulled off is the invention, design, and manufacture of gravity wave telescopes. There's now 3 of them around the world. And, but the fine-tuning we see in the dark stuff exceeds the very best example of what we human beings have been able to pull off by a factor of a trillion times. Now, no one would say that we humans are not personal beings. We are personal beings. I don't know of any philosopher or scientist who would dispute that. But what dark stuff is telling us is that the creator of the universe has a degree of personality that's far, far greater than anything that any human being can possibly manifest. As I mentioned last night, we're talking 10 to the 96 times minimum, more intellect, more knowledge, more power, more creativity, and more care and love than we human beings are able to manifest. Well, the question that my quantum physicist friend in the airplane really was bothering me. He says, look, if there's a God out there, he sure seems to have imposed a lot of suffering on life and humanity in particular. I mean, we live in a universe that's just dominated by entropy. And, that's how physicists talk. And what we mean there is decay. The universe is governed by a very high degree of decay. Second law of thermodynamics. Maybe you've heard of Murphy's Law, how everything gets more disordered with respect to time. And my quantum physicist friend said, I can think of some reasons why you want to have thermodynamics, but why so much of it? If there's an all-powerful, all-loving God out there, why is he subjecting us to such an incredible high degree of decay, of disorder in our life? Why is the universe decaying so much? And so I began my response by saying, well, God has actually designed the laws of physics for the very eradication of what you're complaining about. There's an all-powerful God out there. Why is there so much evil and suffering? He says that's why we have the laws of physics. That's why we have thermodynamics. That's why we have entropy. They're all been created and designed by God so that he can quickly and efficiently eradicate all evil and suffering and actually grant to human beings who are willing to be redeemed from their sin and evil and to have their free will capability of experiencing and expressing love enhanced. And it tells us, for example, in Romans 1, the whole creation has been groaning under its bondage to decay. The entire universe is subject to this pervasive law of decay. So from one end of the universe to the other, from one moment of its beginning until now, it's been subject to this bondage to decay. Ecclesiastes 1 and 10 through 12 says everything decays. Everything we can see in the universe is decaying. And the rate of decay never stops. There's not a place where you can say, well, let's just put a stop to the decay. People try to do that with special skin products, but it really doesn't work. You can't stop the decay. You can try to do something about the appearance of decay, but underneath all that stuff you put on your skin, the decay just keeps going. It never stops. But I'm sorry. The law of decay is optimal for allowing the formation of stars and planets. That's one thing my quantum physicist friend was able to discover or accept. If you don't have entropy, if you don't have a pervasive law of decay, stars and planets won't even form. And then if you want life, you have to have stars and planets, and therefore you have to have some level of decay just to get the stars and planets forming. And as an astronomer, I was able to explain to him, these stars and planets cannot form unless the rate of decay is extremely high. It must be higher than any rate of decay we can measure here on Earth. The highest rates of decay that we can see in science are in the cosmos, not here on planet Earth. But they must be that high for stars and planets even to form. And when we come down to planet Earth, we need an extremely high level of decay for plants to be able to produce the food that we eat and for animals to be able to digest the food. I mean, for example, when you take food in, we're basically using that food, burning it to produce energy that we can produce for work. But it's at an extremely low level of efficiency. It has to be in order for us to be able to, you don't want too much heat in your stomach, for example. So we need these very high level rates of decay. But it says, what I find really interesting, the optimal level of decay we need in the universe to get stars and planets and plants and for animals to be able to consume the food that plants provide so that we can efficiently perform work. The optimal level of decay there is identical to the optimal level of decay we need to restrain evil as efficiently as possible and to be able to prepare humans for their ultimate roles in the new creation. Now, I was able to share with them my testimony, how I wasn't raised in a Christian home, but I began to study the different religions of the world, and how only in Christianity do we have a two-creation religion, where God creates the universe, the first creation, as a tool in God's hands to eradicate all evil and suffering. Then there's a new creation once evil and suffering been eradicated, where he takes redeemed humans and the righteous angels where they will dwell forever. And it's a realm where evil will never be experienced again. But to me, the amazing thing is, God has designed the physics of the universe in such a way that not only is evil and suffering eradicated, the free will capability of human beings is enhanced so we can experience a far greater degree of love and express love in the new creation than anything that's possible in this creation. And so I pointed out that the decay rate is not so high as to discourage us from productive work. I mean, I don't care what career you're in, what occupation you have, whatever you have as a way of a career, everything you do, all the work you do, it will decay. I mean, I write books, but I know that within a few decades, no one's going to be reading my books anymore, and the books will all decay away. So there's a time limit on the work that I produce. And, you know, my wife is always trying to get me to do yard work, but one of the things that really discourages me from yard work, I can spend an entire Saturday afternoon attempting to get the yard the way she looks. I can tell you, one afternoon won't do it. But 2 weeks later, I got to do it all over again. I mean, it especially happens here in Hawaii. What I've noticed here in Hawaii is how much yard work you got to do to maintain the beauty of what we see here in Hawaii. And, you know, for a lot of us, it's like, who cares? It's all going to decay in 2 weeks. But God has made sure that the decay rate is not so high that all of us give up and say there's no point to doing any work. The work lasts enough that it begins to have an impact. But the decay rate is not so low as to let the human sin go unrestrained. The decay rate is high enough to ensure that the more sin we commit, the more pain we experience. I mentioned this briefly last night. Because of the law of decay and the very high level of decay we see in the universe, it works in such a way that the more sin we humans commit, the more pain we experience, the more work we do, and the more time that gets wasted. And we are biologically designed that none of us likes extra pain, extra work, or wasted time. And what I'm talking about here is whenever any one of us sins, we do damage to our environment. And where we experience the more pain, the more work, and the wasted time is repairing that damage. It also explains why the Bible tells people who are in authority, you know, parents, the government, the police, the army, their role is to ensure that those that commit the evil are the ones that experience the more pain, the more work, and the more wasted time. And I think I can share with all of you who are parents, have you ever noticed how skilled your children are of trying to transfer the consequences of their sin to you, so you wind up doing the extra work? You wind up being the one who wastes time and experiences the pain. The role of us as parents is to ensure that our children are the ones that have to undo the damage that their sin has caused and discover, hey, this is painful, it's extra work, it's wasted time, and this was what motivates them not to do it in the future. But there's another lesson we can gain from this, something you see in the book of Job. You know, Job realized these truths just by looking at what he saw in the natural realm. But he also recognized no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't deal with what nature was telling him to do. The laws of physics were telling him, hey, you need to avoid sin because the consequences are not pleasant. It's something I shared with my sons when they were growing up. If I don't discipline you, the laws of physics will. They'll take over, and you know it's not going to be that pleasant. But what Job discovered is, as hard as he could try, he couldn't do what the laws of physics were motivating him to do, to avoid evil and pursue virtue. But as he looked out at the nature, he said, there's a God out there, as I just shared, a God who's very powerful, a God who's knowledgeable, a God who's intelligent, a God who's caring and loving. And he reasoned, okay, I am incapable of doing what the laws of physics are encouraging me to do, to avoid evil and pursue virtue. But there's a God out there that cares for me, that loves me. He's loving enough to do for me what I can't do for myself. He's powerful enough to do for me what I can't do for myself. And he's intelligent and knowledgeable enough to figure out a way to do for me what I can't do for myself. So as Job who said, by the way, the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, it's got the historical books. Genesis is the first of the historical books. Then you get the wisdom books. Job is the first of the wisdom books. Then you got the prophetic books. And so they're all ordered chronologically, but Job is actually older than the book of Genesis. We know that because in the book of Job, the patriarchs are doing the sacrifices, not the priests. And we don't have nations, we have city-states. That's just two of several evidences that the content of the book of Job predates that of the book of Genesis. Another one be, look at the poetry. It's written in a poetry that's designed to be easily memorized. I think it was the young man Elihu who was memorizing the debate between Job and his three friends and had it verbatim, and therefore was passed on generation to generation until Hebrew became a written language. I mean, if you look at the Hebrew poetry in Job, it really is designed to be easily memorized word for word. But it was Job who determined, I'm not able to do what the universe is telling me to do, what the laws of physics are telling me to do, but there's a God out there who can do for me what I can't do for myself. So what you see in the 19th chapter is he declares that he's putting his confidence and trust in the creator of the universe to do for him what he can't do for himself. He says, I know there's an advocate between me and God. There's a redeemer who's prepared to deliver me. I'm putting my faith and trust in that redeemer. He will do for me what I can't do for myself. Well, in the course of this 2.5-hour flight I had with the German quantum physicist, towards the end he says, I've asked you 8 questions. You got to tell me, why do you have such well-prepared answers to my 8 questions? And I says, well, your 8 questions are chapter titles in a book I wrote. And he said, no way. There's no way I believe you. Well, I just came from a ministry trip. And, when I go on a ministry trip, there's my briefcase down there. When I go on a trip, I fill it with books to give away to people that I meet that I think will help them in their journey to find Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior. This is the end of the trip. All I had left was 2 items. But one of the items I had left was this one, the book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. So I said, take a look at the table of contents. He opened it up and said, oh, those are my 8 questions. Moreover, they're in chronological order in which I asked them. I said, well, you're not the first person I've talked to that's asked these questions. As I share with people, my rationale for writing books is engaging people who are skeptics, who are unbelievers, finding out what their questions are, and my book writing is basically designed to equip believers as well as unbelievers to have good answers to those questions. So he looked at that and I said, you can keep that. That's the last book I got, but it's yours. And he grabbed and said, thank you. Then he said, yeah, by the way, his English was flawless. But he said, would you happen to have anything in German? And I said, well, I got one other item in my briefcase, and it happened to be the only item that we have that's in multiple languages. It was a DVD, a documentary that we actually produced on Mauna Kea on the Big Island. I got permission to go to the Keck telescope years ago. They even allowed me to climb up on the telescope so we could film this documentary, Journey Toward Creation. And we have it in 11 languages, and I was able to give it, and it says one of the languages is German. So he was able to take that home with him. And the whole point is that heavens proclaim his righteousness and all people see his glory. I noticed that was a passage that Richard put up as he ended up his message. It's one of my favorite passages. But the point I want to share with all of you is, if you prepare good reasons, and God will use the good reasons you prepare, whatever reasons you prepare, he'll put that to use and develop that gentleness and respect. And people have often asked me, okay, I get the preparing good reasons part. I can just borrow them off your website or get them from your books. How do I get that gentleness and respect and a clear conscience? I said, that's why God has chosen us to spread the gospel and not the angels. If he wanted it done perfectly, he would have sent the righteous angels. They're not sinners. For some reason, God chooses to send us who are sinners to be the ones to take the gospel to unbelievers. But what I've discovered over the years is through sharing my faith that I begin to work on my problems with developing gentleness and respect and a clear conscience, the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And so what I would encourage you to do is, begin to share your faith. And by the way, the first time I shared my faith, I made a lot of mistakes. I embarrassed myself, but that's how you learn. And get feedback. I remember one time when I was just brand new on the Caltech campus and was engaging a bunch of graduate students and postdocs about my Christian faith, and I got embarrassed. But I've got some feedback and just said to the atheists that were there, can you help me? Where do you see the weak spots in what I was sharing with you? And they were very eager to point them out. And I said, I also want your help on, my demeanor. Can you share with me where I've been maybe a little bit arrogant or obnoxious? And again, they were very eager to tell me. So get that kind of feedback. And there's one reason why Jesus sent out people in pairs to share the gospel, because we can help one another. Say, you know what, next time we do this, could you please avoid that, or could you pursue this? And so seek feedback from your fellow believers. And also be aware of who else might be listening. So for example, we were in first class, we were in the second row, and what I was not aware of, there were two people behind us who were listening to every word that was going on in the conversation. And so be aware that there's bystanders there, and to be open to sharing with them. Because I've often been in situations where I've been sharing with someone, say on the airplane or in the airport, and they were not receptive, but there were people listening that were receptive. And so be prepared to realize there may be unexpected people that you can share your faith with. We are going to have a Q&A time, but I notice on my clock here, I've ended a bit early. I wonder if I could take a couple of questions from you, and then we'll actually save the time so we can have an extended Q&A of the whole year. But if any of you have a quick question, I'll take it. So with the moderator's permission, I'll take 2 questions, and then we'll bring up everybody here, and that'll give us a little more extended time for a Q&A with the whole panel.
I'll be real honest. I've been a Christian a long time, but other than real close family and friends, I've not been bold enough to share my faith. And I've had a chance to travel quite a bit also too, and I'm not an astrophysicist. Is there a way that we can start, like a question to start talking to strangers to
Yes.
get them to engage with us?
Okay, good question. I'm glad you asked that. How do you get a spiritual conversation going? So when I'm on an airplane, and it's a little more challenging now because they got these seats where the people can put their smartphones up and they immediately start watching a movie. So you don't want to be rude and interrupt what they're interested in. But I've been on airplanes where they just get bored with what's on there and they put it away, then you can open up a conversation. People love to talk about themselves. And so ask them questions. Where are you flying to? What do you do for a living? What kind of family do you have? If you ask them enough questions, time will come where they'll ask you questions. I mean, the story I told today is a bit of an extreme example, because he immediately introduced himself as an atheist and as a quantum physicist from Germany. You don't get that from everybody on an airplane. But you can get the conversation started by asking questions. Ask some questions, and you'll begin with questions that are not too personal, and if you see they're receptive, you can get more and more personal. And so it's a way to get through to people, because they realize, okay, I'm interested in them. And, I'm not just trying to promote myself. I'm actually showing genuine interest. And by the way, non-Christians can spot when you're actually doing it with an ulterior motive. So it's important that you basically have a heart just to get to know people. So just ask questions and be aware that people like to talk about themselves. And sometimes I have to wait a long time before they ask me a question, like 40 minutes. So, because some people really like to talk about themselves. And you just trust the Holy Spirit to give you the opportunity. And also recognize there's times when the Holy Spirit is telling you, this door is closed. And so look for some other opportunity that might be there. So this person might not be listening, but someone else might be listening. And look for that as an opportunity. And one thing I do to try to start conversations, I'll open up my computer. I might be working on a PowerPoint or a keynote, and people looking over there saying, what's that all about? I remember on one flight, there was a geologist behind me. He started looking at me, can I ask you some questions? And so a conversation got started. And then the flight attendant came down, and she wanted to ask questions. And there was actually one flight I was on where I was able to give a lecture to everybody on the flight. So, if you want to see some stories, my wife and I put out a book called Always Be Ready, where we talk about stories, but really do it in the context where we're trying to take the focus off of me and just say this will happen to anyone. Anyone who prepares good reasons, anyone who has a heart for reaching non-Christians for faith in Christ, and is willing to try to develop the character of gentleness and respect, you will get these opportunities. And so what I've done in the book is to share stories from my life, but also to share stories from the lives of many people within the church where I serve as a pastor. Basically making the point, this works for everybody. In fact, I kind of look at 1 Peter 3:15 as a promise. God is promising us, if you will develop good reasons, and if you will work on building that character of gentleness and respect, he will perform miracles for you. And you'll see God doing amazing things. And one of the things I've learned as a pastor is that Christians need to see God working miracles in their life to strengthen their faith. I mean, you see it in the book of Exodus, is that when people were seeing God performing miracles on a regular basis, they were walking with the Lord. When they had a long period when they were not seeing these miracles, they began to drift away. I think that's true of all of us. I think that's also another reason why God gives us his exhortation, always be ready. Because we need those opportunities. We need to see those miracles happening in our lives in order to build the character of Christ. God is preparing us for the new creation. A huge part of that preparation is building the character of Christ in our life. Because when we get to the new creation, it's a realm with no sin, no evil. And let me just throw one other thing out here. One of the questions that came from this quantum physicist, he said, well, couldn't God have given us a way so that not so many of us, because he was aware that the Christian message says most people will choose not to spend eternity with God. He says, couldn't God have done it in a way where everybody gets to spend? He says, yes, he could. He could have made us all robots. But God created because he wanted to express his love. He wanted strong love, which means he had to give us strong free will. And with strong free will, you'd run the risk that lots of people will say, no, thank you, I want nothing to do with you, God. But God's goal is in the new creation, we would experience not weak love, but strong love. So that's the reason why he gave us such a strong free will. But he also gave us all the tools we need to be able to be prepared to go into the new creation. And as Paul says, when we get there, we will be rulers and educators of the angels. We get to directly experience the grace of God. The angels only get to observe the grace of God. As Paul says, the angels are intently watching us to learn about this great mystery of the grace of God. It's still mysterious for us, but a whole lot less mysterious because we directly experience the grace of God. So right now we're lower than the angels. In the new creation, we will be higher than the angels because of the training we're getting here on planet Earth. And as Paul says, Do not undervalue the years you have here on planet Earth. It is preparing you for an incredibly important career in the new creation that will last for all eternity. Let's throw it open to the general audience. Thanks. Oh, one more? Okay.
I don't really know how to form the question, but do you see, I see that you're showing us God's signature in space. And it's beautiful, and the more that you know, the more you see it. Can you see that biological, like small and molecular? Do you see a correlation between the two and God's signature?
I see it in all the sciences. I mean, I was asked to come here to focus on the astronomical evidences, but you know, I'd give lectures on the life sciences, social sciences. We see it in all the sciences. And I'm glad you mentioned the word beauty. We see beauty throughout all the sciences. I mean, one of the things that really gets my astronomer friends who are not believers, why are the galaxies so beautiful? In fact, they refer to them as grand design galaxies. Well, where did that grand design come from? Where did that beauty come from? What about these amazing colors we see? And we see it all over here on planet Earth. The animals, the plants are incredibly beautiful. God's beauty is evident everywhere, and he gave us human beings unique capacity to appreciate the beauty. I mean, my pet cat doesn't seem to care 2 bits about the beauty, but he gave that uniquely to his human beings. We alone are created in the image of God. And people often ask me, well, where do you see the greatest beauty in all of the sciences? The equations that describe the physics of the universe. This is where the greatest beauty, in my opinion, is evident. The elegance, the symmetry, the beauty of these equations. So that's why I think every one of you should take some classes in higher mathematics.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Okay, we're going to ask actually the whole panel to come up, and as soon as you put your computer away, just come right back up the stage, Dr. Hugh Ross, and then we're going to get ready for our Q&A time. But before we do that, I've got to give you the pitch. Here's the pitch. Evidence and Answers, we exist here to help bring these guys, these people here to help us. I appreciate, Dr. Ross, just your pastoral heart and helping not just give us information, but how to do apologetics well with other people. That's you giving us both, and I really appreciate that. Because anyone who we come in contact with, we got to be ready. We got to be ready to be able to present hope, and with good reasons we have. So, you know, this year we have some great speakers, and if you want to help Evidence and Answers continue to do this kind of work, whether it's on the college campus, whether it's helping equip churches, whether it's just being able to sponsor debates or other types of these kind of things, helping promote loving God with your mind is what we're about. And we want to give you an opportunity to help support Evidence and Answers. And the way you're going to do that is you are going to look way in the back over there at Taya. She's waving her hand right now. Okay, and during this short break between now and the questions and answers time, give you a chance to go over there and just make some personal contact with her. Tell her, I want to support Evidence and Answers. Tell me how. And then she will connect you. All right? So take a quick 3 to 5 minute break, use the bathroom, get a drink of water, come back for our last Q&A session where I ask some questions and get some answers from our esteemed guests here. All right? Break. Go. Now. Go see Dea. She's right there. Hit the book table. Get a drink of water. Walk around in circles. Cluck like a chicken.